student here during the previous millennium. My speech and theater professor was J.W. Lees. You may recognize that name. J.W. Lee's Courage Theater, right next door. And one of the things he talked about for public speaking was to always follow the 4 S's: stand up, speak up, shut up, and sit down. So I think he would have liked this occasion. Before I move on, just a brief note. Babs DeLay here was also a student of Jay Lee's, and she and I did a little theater together. We were actually husband and wife, and I thought we had something going there. And she gave me the boot for another woman. I still suffer, Babs. It is my great joy and pleasure and privilege to introduce Professor Nina Vought to you tonight. I'm sure most of you know her. She's been leading and inspiring Westminster students for 17 years. Before that, even as a small child, she was organizing and directing neighborhood kids in the plays. So she's been telling people what to do for a very long time. And we're all better for it. If we were listening, then you would realize that we're all better human beings because of Nina. Now, her ecological eating class, her vegan revolution class, are early sellouts and standing room only. She's been doing this for many years. She's had a huge impact on the hundreds of students that have taken those particular classes. They've changed or moderated their eating habits, and they will experience those positive benefits for decades and decades to come. I think she's probably starting a revolution herself. Those hundreds of students certainly affect their families and their peers, and this is how revolution begins. This is how transformations happen. During the last academic year, besides designing all the sets for all the shows, Nina and her students created more than 300 costumes for a very small group of people. That's a remarkable, remarkable occurrence. You'd think that with that kind of pressure, it just turned into a stitch and bitch. But you know what? Under Nina's tutelage, it's really more like the sew and glow. And that's what it is. I would drop in there every once in a while, and that's what was happening. She's an avid practitioner and teacher of yoga, meditation, healthy living, and she's the perfect person to help us understand the transformation, the transformative value of holistic education. Please welcome Nina Vought.
I'd like to begin by saying how grateful I am to be here. It's an honor to be invited. Recently, I saw a compelling musical called Spring Awakening. It's a story told from this perspective of students. These students are trying their best to understand their changing identities. Teachers in this story attempt to impart knowledge they believe is fundamental, but the students find it irrelevant. They find it a distraction from what's going on in their daily lives. It takes up all of their time and energy. The teachers are oblivious to the students who are struggling to make sense of the world. They're struggling to understand attraction. They're struggling to understand right and wrong and who defines that. And they're struggling to simply be true to who they are becoming. I found the story so captivating because it reminds me of my own students here at Westminster College. Even though the script of Spring Awakening was written in the late 1800s, it has a huge following of young people today. Coming-of-age stories have a built-in audience, and students universally go through a time in their lives when they begin to awaken to their unique identities. They experiment with many possibilities along the way. It's a momentous time. They're immersed in a revolution that forms the central axis around which their lives revolve. And you know, most cultures have rites and rituals and mentors for that sort of journey, that journey from youth to adulthood. But in our culture, absent of those rites and rituals, college becomes a stand-in for it. College seems to me like it's a halfway house. It's a midway between dependence and independence. It allows just enough freedom for students to test their wings and experience that precious and intoxicating first taste of life in their own terms. Regularly, professors are mentors and guides for this flight. But unfortunately, just as often, we're seen as the opposite. We're symbols of unenlightened authority, emblems of everything wrong with the world, and tethering their longing to fly. Since young people are faced with a seemingly endless series of choices, I'm grateful that our college considers critical thinking as the primary skill, as a foundational value. Because critical thinking is that skill that students need when they're faced with choices like, well, it's one thing. So critical thinking is this, what we try to impart with students. We get them to evaluate Aristotelian logic, and that's one thing, but how do we get them to apply that critical thinking when it comes time to make decisions about relationships, sex, alcohol use? At the same time, students are writing and thinking about physics and biology and marketing. But as we know, knowledge seldom equates to wisdom. And education is no guarantee of ethical behavior. As professors, we're seeking to educate young people precisely at the point in their lives when they're embarking on this journey that will shape who they become. Yet all too often, we treat cognitive development as separate from emotional and spiritual and social development. In our everyday thinking about teaching, we forget to acknowledge and include the critical times students are involved in. You know, I get it. It's scary to be involved with students in these areas of their lives. But when we don't, we get that same disconnect that was in the musical Spring Awakening. And higher education finds itself being called out of touch and irrelevant and of little practical value. When it came time to create a major, it seemed only natural for us to consider the whole person. We're fortunate that many of the requisite skills for theater are also valuable life skills, right? Being able to collaborate, or the ability to meet a deadline, or think creatively and certainly on your feet, right? Those are all skills of the theater. But even further, we expect students to honestly and clearly communicate on stage. And so we ask them to practice the same off stage. We took our model from sports. I know you wouldn't think that. But coaches are always inspiring athletes to build character on the field and off the field, and no one questions the relevance of both. And we thought, well, who better to build character than actors? Don't get me wrong. Theatrical training is front and center in our program. And if you ask our students, they'll tell you how rigorous it is. But at the same time, they're honing their skills of interpreting and they're also honing life skills that help them navigate their present as well as their future. Yoga and meditation are part of the curriculum. Leadership, ensemble skills are expected. Creative energy, handling stress, learning and applying healthy nutrition are all essential skills of the theater professional. And those skills cross over into the realm of everyday choices that shape who we become as individuals and, by extension, as professionals. Students are longing for this practical application to their studies. Lisa Ellis teaches a May-term class that's filled to overflowing, like our food classes are in May-term. Students want this information. So a few years ago, I persuaded the Liberal Education Committee to allow basic yoga to fill and satisfy a living arts requirement. At the time, some of my colleagues thought that stretching and relaxing and meditating were outside the purview of higher education. But students knew better. Since then, there's been 5 sections of yoga that fill to capacity every single semester. And I teach one of those sections because it gives me another opportunity to connect with students at this revolutionary time. It's always the relaxing poses that are their favorites. Yoga, for many of them, is a respite from the onslaught of learn, cram, strive, right? It's that one place where they get to simply be. I wish you could see the look on their faces when I tell them to close their eyes and relax and listen to the sound of their breath. What's more, relaxing is a skill that will serve them the rest of their lives. It needs to be valued as highly as a second language or effective public speaking. You know, of course, there's counselors and there's classes that students can access to help them navigate this time in their lives. It's a minefield of experimentation and decision-making. But all of us need to recognize the deeply transformative changes that are the consuming focus of most college students. Faculty, ideally, could integrate into the method and content of more classes the broader implications of their field in order to acknowledge and honor the transformational essence of the college student. For example, I imagine environmental studies that insist that students have measurable ways to reduce their own carbon footprint before they go about changing the world. I imagine psychology programs that help students discover and implement their own healing and wholeness. I imagine colleges that maintain an open and continuous discussion about responsible decision-making skills. Discussions on how to make our courses relate to students' lives isn't just a good idea. It's necessary if we want to engage the whole student. Higher education is under assault. Costs are climbing, and the value of a degree is plummeting. In the musical Spring Awakening, there's no connection between what the students learn in school and the revolution that encompasses their lives. I really believe this coming-of-age story has some profound lessons if we will hear them. Educating the whole person will not only engage students in a deeper way, but graduates who have a self-knowledge and depth of character will revalidate higher education. It's time for college, all colleges, to move beyond the theory of the ideals like critical thinking, and insist that practices learned in the classroom of every discipline become the skills students use to navigate this revolutionary transition and thereby their lives. You know, I'm lucky. I'm an artist, and I get to be creative every single day. But my greatest fulfillment comes from being a witness to this revolution, watching the blossoming of young people who come to us scared, immature, and unsure of themselves, and leave confident and aware, knowing how to think, how to be creative, how to be resourceful, self-possessed individuals who know they will make their mark on this world. Those differences between how they arrive and how they depart are a sheer joy to behold and to celebrate. Witnessing and assisting this transformation is the most rewarding experience. Thank you.